Back. This is our fourth week. We're very excited to have this last week with Dr. Strother. I have a couple of announcements as we get started. So many of you who have joined us on these webinars are brand new to ag forestry. We would love the opportunity to connect with you. So please stay on the line with us today. After the webinar, we're going to do a brief information session. So that's going to happen right as we wrap up with Dr. Strother. And then graduation, class 41, they are going to graduate. It has been a long year in limbo. We are so excited for them to graduate. So they will have a virtual program. It's going to be fantastic. You'll get to hear from speakers from the class. Chief Vicki Christensen from the Forest Service will be there to accept the Stu Bledsoe Award and address the class. And lastly, we will have some entertainment from the Peterson Farm Brothers. So that is all happening April 16th, 6 to 8 p.m. You can purchase your tickets on our website, and we're going to have baskets full of goodies that get delivered to as part of your ticket purchase. If you want that in time, we have to have your ticket purchased by March 21st. Oh. And last, sorry about that. The last thing is, as we're wrapping up this webinar series, I want to make sure that I share with you the upcoming 2 parts of our 2021 webinars. In April, we will be doing a series on collaboration with the William D. Ruckelshaus Center, which is a collaborative public policy effort of WSU and UW. And that, similar to this, will be a 4-part series that builds on itself and will also include a self-assessment of collaborative competencies. So we're really excited. That'll be on Wednesdays in April. And then in June, and I highlighted it in red because we just changed this, it's going to be Tuesdays in June. We're going to be doing a series on Inspire and Serve. So Lisa Berglund with Gold Dog Media will be helping us unpack storytelling and how we share our stories in impactful ways, how we share the story of our natural resources and the stewardship that each of us is doing out in the world. So you can learn more and register at agforestry.org/webinars. So without any further ado, I know we are all excited to unpack some difficult conversation techniques with Dr. Strother.
Thank you, Hannah. Welcome back, everyone. This is our 4th and final webinar of this series, and I have enjoyed it immensely, just having the chance to engage with all of you on chat. I wish I could see your faces and the video because it would be so much more interactive as well, of course, if we had audio. But since we are in a webinar format, we are going to use what we have. And I've just really enjoyed getting to know some of you and also to hear about some of the challenges that you've been facing, some of the ways that you've been sharing skills and ideas and techniques with each other, because this is a space where we thrive on learning together. I don't have all the wisdom and insight. I have a lot of failures to share, of course, as many of you know, but the whole point is to gather in a place where we can learn together. And so in this final webinar, we are going to dive into this topic of courageous conversations. We started it last week, and we're going to continue it today with a slightly different focus. And as we do that, I want to just start by taking you to a dinner table. A dinner table because it seems like this has been the place where a lot of courageous conversations have happened, and a lot of them have fallen apart. And if you have a family like mine, where there are a lot of differences of opinion, especially about political things, you know that when Thanksgiving comes around, there's conversation with people in the family about, don't talk about this, don't bring up that, don't say this to so-and-so, remember what happened last time. And we see these landmines that can happen in places like a Thanksgiving dinner and with certain people who have very strong opinions about things. And I can recall not so long ago where we had a family gathering and we had those pre-conversations, don't bring up this, don't bring up that, so-and-so will feel this way about it. But we have 2 particular folks in our family who have pretty strong opinions and also tend to maybe not regulate their stress or their emotions as easily as others. And I can recall I had gone into the kitchen to go get some food and I was making something. And I started to hear some voices raising from my patio. And after not too long, I saw someone open the slider door and come inside, and you could see the frustration on their face, the eyes rolling. And I kind of wondered what had gone on. And I went outside with the platter of food and discovered that there was just silence happening on the patio. Silence. And, I heard someone on the other side saying, I'm not going to talk about it anymore. I'm done with it. And I had clearly walked into a situation where there had been a very challenging conversation that had taken place. And what I understood was that it was one person's opinion that had made another person feel judged and shamed and angry. And then it turned into a combat, a verbal slinging of words. And I tend to believe that's not uncommon. Like, please just tell me in the chat, like, this is not unusual, correct? That we have these kinds of interactions even with people that we love. And sometimes it's with people that we love and care about the most where this happens the most, because we might be more free with them than we would perhaps be with others. Thank you, Kara, for saying, yes, it's common in my family. I'm sure there's others. And the thing about this is that, yes, this is happening all over America, happens all over the world, but it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. And I think that what we can talk about today is some tools to figure out how to navigate conversations where we can still be honest and still address issues, but in a way that opens up the conversation without closing it down or without creating a place of aggression. So let's just do a very quick poll. I'd like to ask you, and Hannah will help me with the poll. In the past year, have you engaged in a conversation about opposing opinions that became emotional or combative? And you can put it in the chat too. Emotional or combative, like it surfaced some stuff that was really heavy. So we got some responses coming in. So again, if you're just joining us, we're taking a poll. Have you engaged in a conversation in the past year that has led to emotional or feelings of combat due to opposing opinions? So I'm going to just end the polling here and share those results. So look, the vast majority, 95% of you have had such an experience. And, I think a lot of that probably has to do with the kind of political environment we were in this year. We had a presidential election happening and elections to Congress, and that has created a lot of things that are more on the surface for us because we're thinking about them, we're seeing them in the news every day. They're more visceral for us. So that makes a lot of sense. So let's talk through this a little bit. At the last week, we talked about approaches to address behavior. So behavior, something that someone has done that may be having an unintended consequence or having some kind of toxicity or negative impact, and how to address that behavior with candor, curiosity, and compassion. So a lot of the conversations that we were having last week focused on what we could do, say, in a workplace setting or in a group setting to be able to approach someone and talk about how their behavior impacted us. And what we're going to talk about today is difference of opinion. It's not necessarily that someone did something that had a poor consequence, but that they have an opinion that we disagree with, I disagree with, you disagree with. And we want to talk about that. We want to be able to address that. So that's what we're going to talk about more today. And the reason I want to talk about that is because what we know is that this is on people's minds. Like, this is a big deal. So this is a study that was done in 2020. That should be study, not student experience, excuse me, that polarization amongst Americans has grown more rapidly in 40 years than in most developed countries. And there's been a lot of studies that have been done by the Pew Research Center that corroborate this, showing that we are at a place right now in our country where, at least politically, people think really poorly of each other. And yeah, there's a lot of folks in the middle, but they're extreme polarizations. Now, you might be thinking like, oh gosh, she can talk about politics. And I want to be very clear. I'm not going to talk about any political issues like in detail or to go into my political opinions. That's not what I'm going to do today. What I care about is how do we talk about those things with people? How do we frame conversations around really sensitive, controversial topics, the kinds of things that are bound to make you go, "Arr!" How do we have those kinds of conversations so that we can grow and learn together? Because if we don't, we're going to have a country where we cannot create solutions, where we can't create solutions. And that's about our country, but just think about now, how do we take those same strategies that we're talking about today and how do we bring them into our family? How do we bring them into our work relationships, our organizations? Because all of it's relevant. Even if it's not about politics, we still have politics internally that we deal with in our groups. So we had talked the first two webinars about emotional intelligence. So I'm going to bring us back because I know we have some people who are joining us for the first time. And we framed all of this in emotional intelligence because it's the underscore, it's the foundation to be able to have good, productive, courageous conversations. So we talked about self-awareness, which is the ability to recognize our thoughts and our emotions in the moment that we're experiencing them. So what's going on for me? Being aware of what's going on for me. Self-regulation, which is that ability to cope with stress in a way that doesn't burden other people, a healthy way of coping with stress, finding balance. And then empathy, which is the ability to recognize and have compassion for someone else and what they're thinking and feeling. So these are the three most core dimensions of emotional intelligence that we rely on when we're engaging in a difficult conversation. And then last week we talked about behavior. How do we talk to someone about their behavior? And we talked about this kind of framework for engaging in that conversation in a way that keeps your candor, like you're candid and you're honest, but also allows for compassion, allows for curiosity, allows for an opportunity to reflect and discuss issues together, and ultimately to come up with a solution or to come up with an agreement about the way forward. So we're going to anchor today's conversation in some of those things that we've talked about before. So in the chat, I would like you to, if you're available, if you can say, what are the types of opinion-related issues that you avoid? Those things where you're like, do not talk about that with so-and-so, or I'm not bringing that up. Like, what are those kinds of issues? Just like, okay, politics, yeah, thank you, Amy, but you can even go into more detail on that. I mean, I'm not asking anyone to share opinions, but just say, what are the types of opinions that you do not want to touch with a 6-foot pole? What are those types of issues that make for difficult conversations? Yeah, thank you, Andrea. Climate change, for sure. What else? What else comes up for people? Parenting, absolutely. You see a way that someone parents and you have a different opinion, hard to talk about. Religion, yes, religion. Yes, the social safety net, curious to unpack that. Organic versus conventional agriculture. I'm not in agriculture, but I can understand why that would be a hot topic in your industry. Gender issues, yes. What else comes up? There's gotta be more than this, people. Tell me what's going on. What are you avoiding, or what has created tension when you have talked about it? Yeah, when people don't have all the facts. Where that maybe it's information that's kind of flowing down through some avenues that may not have correct information. Forest management for wildfires, sexuality, racism, yes, absolutely. Especially this past year, it's been a very difficult topic to discuss. And oftentimes we feel unsafe. We may not feel like we're safe to even go into those conversations. Someone says, my mother, yes. COVID-19. Left versus right. Yes, I think that we could probably talk about this all day. We could probably continue to list off all the things that we have difficulty talking about. So just to think of this for a second, how many times a day in a workplace setting or in a group, like with your friends or family, might you have to navigate those kinds of conversations? Where I go, ooh, I'm not going to say anything there, or ooh, I want to be careful how I respond in this moment. So here's the thing. I think about this arena that we are in. And I think about this as like, divides. And when we have these kinds of difficult topics, we might have certain tendencies. One tendency is to avoid them. One tendency is say, you know what? I'm not going to touch it. It's not worth it. Remember last week, we talked about all the reasons we may not even go into a difficult conversation. It's awkward, it's not worth it, it's not worth the risk, I don't have the relationship with that person. So we might be likely to avoid that conversation. And what happens when we avoid the conversation is whatever assumptions we have about the issue or about that person's opinion, they go unchecked. Whatever assumption we have just stays there. So we're not having an opportunity to find out more about it and to kind of unpack that assumption. And as a result, whatever divisions there are just going to grow, or they're going to maintain, or they're going to grow. And we're not learning anything new, and we're not coming up with any mutual solutions. It's just keeping the issue there. The other thing that happens on the other side is you have combat of words, or sometimes it can be worse, but words most likely. And what happens with combat is that when you have two people who are talking about an issue, who go on into that kind of verbal fight together, the assumptions they have about each other or about the issue just persist, because now it's become personal. And like, now you're like, yeah, I knew that. They're crazy or whatever it is. The assumptions might persist. The defenses go up. Like, okay, I am not going to let that person talk to me like that. I'm going to prove that they're wrong. This is why I'm right. So our defenses go up. The divisions grow. We're not learning anything new, and we don't have any mutual solutions. That's the tendency of what happens in difficult conversations about opinions. Tell me if I'm wrong, but this is what I've certainly seen and what a lot of research shows. But there's a place in the middle. This is the opportunity. It's the potential. And frankly, hopefully it's why we're all here today is, so what can we do about it? How do we have difficult conversations? And I believe that when we anchor them in curiosity and the opportunity for connection with that person and with vulnerability, the willingness to let people see us as human, as imperfect, then the outcomes can be really different. It can be about new perspectives. So whatever assumption I have can be checked, and I might have a new perspective, a new understanding, showing that my assumption might be wrong. Deeper understanding. So I had this surface level idea, and now it goes deeper. Empathy, the ability to be able to see someone, understand their experience through a different lens, their lens. And it's this opportunity for mutual solutions, to be able to say, okay, like, what can we work towards together now that we know all this about each other and about your stance? That's a place of growth here. I believe that that is the bridge, whether it's about politics, whether it's about internal workplace issues, whether it's things going on with our family, parenting. I really believe that this is the bridge. And it sounds so simplistic, but it's really hard, isn't it? It's not easy to make this happen. The insight that has been fascinating for me over the past 2 years has been that facts don't really matter. Facts don't really matter. This has been huge for me. And when I see a lot, if it's on social media or I see it in conversation, like between two people engaging in a heated way, is that oftentimes people are trying to take their truth, their facts, their statistics, which they believe are true, and trying to use those to change someone else's mind. But the problem is that actually as human beings, we make decisions emotionally. There's been some really clear research about that. We are emotional human beings. We make decisions emotionally. And so when someone tries to sway us with facts, we kind of just go, yeah, whatever. Like, okay, I might acknowledge that, but that's not necessarily going to change my opinion. And so what I'm seeing constantly on both sides of the aisle, I see this across the table in conference rooms, is that at the end of the day, the facts are not going to make the difference. Now, can they be used? Yes, they can be used strategically, but not usually at the beginning of a difficult conversation. They can come in later. And the other thing it brings up is this idea about that came from Teddy Roosevelt. And this adage that that we've seen is really interesting, and it's true. Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And so we might be in a conversation saying all the things that we believe are truth, that are right. But at the end of the day, if that person does not feel connected to you, if they don't feel a sense of compassion, if they don't feel accepted for their opinion, they really don't care what you know. I believe we have probably all been there. We need to know that our relationship is connected with respect, without shame, without judgment, to be able to even listen to another person. It's kind of just the groundwork. So let's talk a little bit about that. I'm going to give you all an example of something that happened for me on social media. And I'm going to talk about this both in a social media perspective as well as a verbal dialogue, because it's both. Like, and there's probably other ways you can have these conversations. Email is another one. So I use Facebook. I don't use anything else. Unlike a lot of people in my generation, I'm a little behind, but Facebook's what I use. And someone posted something that caught my attention. And I'm not going to tell you exactly what it was. I'm going to just give you sort of like a kind of another example of what it was. They posted a meme similar to the sun revolves around the earth. Okay, the sun revolves around the earth. So in my head, there's all kinds of things going through my mind, like, wasn't that disproved in the 1500s? Hasn't that been disproved for 500 years? But so in a nutshell, they posted something similar to that. Okay. Now, I would love to hear from you in the chat. If someone posts something like that, that you know is factually not true, there's no evidence to support it, there's a ton of evidence that disproves that, what might be your instinctual reaction? So in the chat, don't tell me what like you might do after thinking about it, but what is it that what does your mind start to do? And what do you see other people do in response to that? Some people ignore it. Thank you, Kara. Some people are like, they kind of roll your eyes and keep scrolling, right? Scroll, whatever, just keep going, blow it off, okay? So a lot of you ignore it. Okay, laugh to yourself, move on. Post a link with info, yeah. Send them a fact-checking link. Keep scrolling, provide some science intel, absolutely. Yes, ignore. Okay, correct them, move on, yes, lots of things. What I'm finding is because I've been observing this more and more over time, and I'm seeing some behavior or some responses that can have a really interesting impact, right? Like Heidi says, the instinct is to call them out, but there might be a better thing to do, and that's what we're going to talk about. So the instinctual response might be something like, what? What, are you kidding? Or that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever read. Don't you know? And then insert facts, numbers, statistic, figures, study, study, study. Or something like, what the heck is wrong with you? Now, you might be thinking this, and you might decide not to post that, but a lot of people do actually, we do write these things. What? Or we say things that don't quite have that full impact, but enough of it for the person to feel judged. So that has become an instinctual response. And this actually, like, we can explain this in our brains, okay? So our limbic system is where we have our the emotional part of our brain. It's like our emotional energy and our response. Our reptilian brain, which is the oldest part of our brain, from, before we were, if truly had human species, that's our basic bodily functions that have to do with our survival instincts, fight, flight, freeze, or faint. And so these aspects of our brain often override anything else. They're like the things that we jump to instinctually, emotions and kind of a fear-based response or a threat-based response. But it's in our prefrontal cortex where we do our highest level thinking. We do our highest level thinking, our critical thinking that allows us to say, okay, I want to say this, I want to do this, but maybe that's not the best response in this moment. And it's a prefrontal cortex that we have to put into action when we see something that really provokes us or kind of triggers us. Because the truth is that when we respond to someone, whether in conversation or in social media or in email, which I see a ton of, is that it has this impact. It shames and it judges. Now, I may not have intended that. If I write, that's crazy, what are you thinking? I might not be thinking to myself, I'm going to shame and judge this person. But it's the impact that it may have. And some people will then go to defense. Like they just put their guard up and they want to fire back. Well, that's not true. And you clearly don't know what you're talking about, blah, blah, blah. It's that combat. And some people just shut down. It just shuts them down, depending on what their experience is with that kind of behavior. And the problem with that is that then any opportunity for learning and growth is just like this. It closes that door. The learning and growth closes for that person and for you as well, right? And I have been there. I mean, I'm as human as anyone else, and I have been there. So I want to talk about some places where I have been able to grow more over the last couple of years and just try to lean into that prefrontal cortex thinking, which does not come instinctively. So again, this situation I told you about, the person posts something like the sun revolves around the earth, or the earth is the center of the universe. So this is what I ended up doing in that context. I thought, yeah, I can scroll, I can just ignore it. But I thought to myself, I have enough of a relationship with that person where I feel like I could inquire and potentially learn more and maybe talk about it without them shutting me down. And so I decided, let's just go for it. So here's what I did. I said, and it's Jane, not her real name. I said, hey, Jane, it's been a long time since we chatted. I've missed seeing you the past few years. And that's true. Like I actually, it came to mind. I really do miss her. And it was just an opportunity to enter the conversation and build that, like reconnect with her. I didn't just want to start off with like, hey, your facts are wrong. Probably not the right way to start off. So started with connection. And then I said, hey, I saw this meme you posted and I was wondering, could you say more about it? Just left it like that. Totally curious. And that's what I want to highlight there, the curiosity. I'm wondering what she wanted to communicate by that. And her communication went to some things about, a fact, like a website where she was getting this information. What's going through my head is, gosh, that doesn't sound like a very credible website. Doesn't sound like there's a lot of science behind that. Like I'm already judging this in my head. But of course, I have to really think about how I communicate my concerns. And so she was explaining that. And this happened over the course of about, I think like 2 or 3 days, because you text something and then someone waits and they respond. So there's some time. And so when they explained, where they got that evidence, my response ended up looking something like this. I think I read something about that too. It brought back all these memories of learning about Galileo and Copernicus growing up. And I checked it out. However, it turns out that it's been fact-checked as false. Bummer. I was really hoping that the Earth was the center of the universe. Wouldn't that be great if it was? I wanted to pass this along because I know you wouldn't want to confuse people. Thanks for the conversation. And the end result of that was she removed the post. Now, I don't know if she removed the post because she was feeling ashamed of it or embarrassed. But ultimately, what I was trying to do in that conversation was to make sure she knows that I'm not judging her. Or at least not publicly. I'm certainly not going to publicly shame her for this. But I also want to know, like, hey, I can see why that might feel true, or I can see why there might be, interest in that. And also to point to some other evidence. And so I think about that conversation as a way to, show some curiosity, connect with that person, like there's some kind of relationship, or you can build a relationship somehow. And then to provide some additional information that they may not be aware of. She may not have realized the impact of posting something that was false. Who knows who would read it and then think it's true. That's how things get passed around that aren't necessarily true. So feel free in the chat if you have any comments about that or any reactions to it. But that's what I want to share as having a social media conversation that can go a different direction than shame and judgment. So let me talk about a few other cases where I've been trying to use some of these skills, trying to get better at developing these muscles around talking about difference of opinion. So again, going back to Facebook, which is my social media place, someone that I had known fairly well about 10 years ago had posted a response to an article. And in the article, and in his response, he used some name. So he named a group of people with some very offensive words. So I have to say that I read it and I felt immediately offended. I felt really hurt by the way this person was characterizing a group of people. And In that moment, again, the question comes, do I scroll? Do I avoid it and just ignore it? Just write that person off, say, oh, that's whatever, you know. Do I decide, or am I going to engage? And I decided to engage. And the way I did that was I said, you know, hey, I call him Don. Let's call him Don. Hey, Don, you know, I really I honor, I respect our friendship. I have many memories of you and your wife over the years and have great respect for you. And I wanted to understand more about what you wrote. You use the words this. Can you say something about that so that I can understand what you meant by that? And then he responded by giving more detail as to why he used this word, this particular term. And he explained that it's because these people do this and this and this. It didn't make me feel any better. It didn't make me feel any better. And, but what it was doing in that moment was allowing us to have a dialogue, and it ended up being a public dialogue because it was a comment section. At least it was a public dialogue for the beginning. And I said, you know, I understand why you see things that way. I want to provide my own personal perspective here so that you can understand how this impacts me. When I see these words, X, Y, Z, the way it lands on me is that you perceive me as this. I don't know if that's in your intention, but it actually, I find very hurt by it because I see myself as being someone who values this, and this seems to be judging me in a different way. And I have experiences that are, what did I say? I said experiences that really underscore why it is that I have these values. I said, I'm happy to talk about this more in person, but I want you to understand that the term that you are using really, I find very hurtful. And I know that that has never been your intention. I see you as someone who really tries to be compassionate and loving to people. And so I just want you to understand how that was impacting me. Feel free to message me if you want to talk more about it. Thanks for listening, or thanks for reading. And so an interesting couple of things happened from that. He actually messaged me and we continued our conversation in a private message. I think we probably had 3 or 4 back or forth kind of responses to each other. And it was very respectful. It was a very respectful conversation. He brought up a lot of things that I disagree with. I have different opinions about. I brought up the same things that he disagreed with. But what it allowed us to do is say, this is how I think about it. I'm recognizing that this is how you think about it. And we come at it differently. My intention was not to change his mind. I wasn't coming at it with a sense of, I'm going to change his mind. I'm going to make him see things the way I see it. He's going to turn around. I wanted him to understand the impact that his words were having. And I just wanted to be able to give him a space for my own life, to see into my space, and for me to understand him better as well. Like, where was that coming from? Why was he saying that? So that was going on in a private message. What was happening on the outside in the public Facebook space, which a lot of people were reading, was that people were commenting, thank you so much for modeling a healthy conversation. Normally people would have jumped in and just jumped on this person, but they were almost respecting that we were having this conversation as the two of us, and they were commenting on the healthy way in which it was happening. So when we have these conversations on social media or via email or in person, we can model what that looks like for someone else who's not sure how to engage. So think about that. How do we model how we want to engage? Another Facebook example, I have plenty of them. Another time, this was fairly recently, when one of my Facebook acquaintances, like an old friend from high school, and I began having a conversation about how we were interpreting things that were happening in the US very recently. And I remember that her first post to me, because I had posted something like a question, like a broad question, how do people feel at this moment? And her first question to me, it felt very combative. I felt like she was coming at me with gloves, like, you know, I really don't like your question. And, you know, it seems like you don't care about this. And she came out with gloves. And what I thought in that moment is, okay, how can I respond to her in a way where we can open up this dialogue rather than shut it down? And so I had to acknowledge what I was saying or doing that was making her feel on defense. Said, you know, I apologize. When I said this, I didn't realize it was having this impact. That was not my intention. Thank you for sharing that with me. I ended up having a really long dialogue on private messenger on Facebook as we talked about our experiences with different political issues. And I can recall in one particular issue, we talked about healthcare. And many of you mentioned that healthcare is one where people have a lot of opinions. And I shared with her my opinion about healthcare based on my experience of my brother, who was 4 years older than me, who passed away in 2017 as a result of a coma. And I shared with her what it was like to go through that experience of being the person to manage his insurance, the person who made all the phone calls. And actually, I was the one at the end of the day who made the decision to pull him off life support with my parents. So it was me who said, this is the time to do this after 8 months. And going through that whole system and the grief and the struggle, the financial decisions, I had shared with her, this is why I have an opinion about this. And she did the same. She said, I want to share with you why I have this opinion about the healthcare system and what I think it needs to be. And our goal, we acknowledged, we said, my goal is not to change your opinion. I want to understand yours better. And I want you to understand mine better. Because if we're going to create better systems in our country, whether locally or nationally, we're going to have to figure out what other people are thinking and what they've gone through. We're going to have to empathize with their experience. And so it resulted in a really rich, vulnerable dialogue between the two of us, where we started to see also where we had common ground. This is what I really want to point out. I went into that dialogue thinking that we were total opposites. And the more we talked about it, the more we started to see that we had a ton of things in common. We just had moments that shifted us on different sides. But we were rooted in some very common values and common opinions about things. So that's what happened. That would not have happened if we had not engaged in that dialogue together. We would probably continue to see each other as two different birds, different feather. And finally, last example I want to bring up, and I hope I'm not boring you with my stories, but think about my mom. My mom is someone who is very different from me. We have very different opinions, values, a lens through which we see the world. And as a result, she's someone that I have found to be challenging to talk to about my way of looking at the world. It has, I can think of many times where I would leave the room crying. I would feel frustrated. I would get in the car, drive away, phone a friend. I had so much anger. I had so much sadness about things. And it honestly really impacts our relationship, or has really impacted our relationship in the past. But because I've been trying to get better, trying to grow this muscle around our relationship and having those difficult conversations, I've been trying different ways to engage with her. And something came up about 3 months ago. I was sitting in her house at the table, and she got up to go get some food. And she said something kind of casually about, let's just say, a claim that was very clearly false. Like I knew it was a false claim, and an opinion that she had based on that false claim. And, like things circulate on the news or rumors or social media. And so I could understand where she was getting that claim. But I knew it to be false because I was actually somehow like I had more inside information perhaps than she realized. So in that moment, I thought, okay, I can say, that's not true, or that's ridiculous, or don't you know? But I just said, Mom, can you tell me more about that? Can you tell me more about that? And through that curiosity, we were able to have a conversation where we can unpack why she had a particular opinion, where that claim came from, that she was rooting her opinion. And I was able to provide some additional information that she was not aware of. And in the conversation, I said things like, I can see where you're coming from. And if that was true, I'd have the same opinion. But actually, from what I'm understanding, that there's a very different set of facts here. Would you mind if I share them with you? Would you be open to hearing what I have read? And then we can talk more about it. And it was probably one of the most productive conversations that we had as adults around something with a different opinion, simply because I was trying my best not to go to a place of judgment or fact shaming. So, when we think about these conversations that are fueled for fire, they're ready to burst into flames at any moment, they're so sensitive, they're so volatile. what can make those conversations productive and meaningful and keep our relationships intact versus turn into something of like shutting down, combat. And the first thing I think about is that genuine interest and care. Like if I come at this being artificial and fake and condescending, not going to happen. People can see through that. People can see through that. So it has to be truly coming from a place of genuine and a genuine interest. And if I'm coming to it with a sense of I'm going to change this person's mind, I'm not going to be that open, because who knows, my mind might be changed through conversation. I can think of a conversation I had about 6-7 years ago, and it's about hunting. So I want to acknowledge that I'm from California. I'm from a place in California where I never heard of hunting for all of my life until I moved to Washington, where suddenly like I'm in a dinner at 13 years old and someone's having pizza with venison. And I thought that was the strangest thing in the world. Now I know, okay, hunting is really common here. But I had an opinion about hunting for so long that was like, oh, hunting's bad, or it's so cruel. I don't even know where I got these opinions. That's just what I thought. And it was with a conversation with 2 hunters who educated me about why they hunt and how humane it is. My mindset shifted completely about hunting. So I have to acknowledge that if I go into a conversation thinking I'm going to change someone's mind, I'm the one that may need to change my mind. I'm the one that may need to step back and really think about my own perspectives. So coming into a genuine interest and that deep listening is where, we're listening or we're reading to understand, not to respond. We're really present with that person, trying to make sense of, okay, where are they coming from? Okay, so they're saying this, and then thinking through it, processing it before we jump to our next thing. Curiosity, tell me more about that. Okay, I want to understand it. So wanting to understand where someone's coming from. Connecting with experiences and viewpoints. I have found that one of the best ways to keep ourselves from unintentionally shaming or judging someone is to find a way to connect with them and what they're saying. For me, sometimes that's like going back to how I used to think about something, or having a very similar experience, finding a way to build a bridge with what they are just talking about. Or I've been there, or I've done that, or I know what you mean. Like genuinely making that connection. Storytelling. So I use stories a lot, as you probably know, and I hope they haven't bored you too much. But when I can share a story about why I have a stance or opinion, it helps that person understand it more clearly, because it takes us into our experience. When I've told a story about my brother and about what it was like to be a caregiver to him, to manage the healthcare system, to navigate the insurance, and I walk people through a day in the life of me during that time, it's more clear for them why I have certain opinions about our healthcare system, or why I want to see some things be changed. So stories can be so compelling and powerful to help someone else understand why we feel the way we do. Vulnerability. To be able to say, you know what, like I got that wrong, or wow, I didn't know that, or I used to feel that way too, and I can understand why you feel that way. To be able to show someone that we are human and imperfect in the moment, it helps reduce those walls that we put up. It helps bring someone's defenses down. And gratitude, gratitude to be able to say, thank you for talking about this. This was a really hard conversation. Like this is a hard topic to even discuss. And I'm just grateful that we can talk about it. That's huge. And so some of the things, like what does that look like in reality? Or what does it sound like in a conversation? I've mentioned some of these things. It can sound like, can you tell me more about that? I think someone brought this up in our last webinar. Can you tell me more about that? Or I want to understand that better. Can you elaborate there? Can you say more about it? I want to understand it better. You might say, like, if you look back, when do you think you started feeling that way? You can help someone kind of go back in time and try to figure out when was it that their opinion about something started to change. So like when it took hold. You can even mirror what you're hearing or summarize what you're hearing so that they know that you're paying attention. They know that you're processing it. So if I'm understanding you right, you're saying this. So they know they're being heard. You can say, I can understand why you see it that way. If it's genuine, like I've been in lots of conversations where I'm like, yeah, honestly, I can totally see why you feel that way. And here's why I have a different stance now. I can say that crossed my mind too. I've often shared, like, this is where I started to have a different opinion, or I might have felt the same way you did. And something happened where I started moving in a different direction. And that's where you can tell that story. You can talk about that set of events. And then you could say, like, I really appreciate you sharing your side of things with me. That's how some of my conversations that I talked about on Facebook, that's what they all ended with. You know, thank you for being open to this conversation. Thanks for engaging with me. I know this is hard to talk about, because then we acknowledge, like, this is not easy stuff. This is really difficult stuff to talk about, and even more difficult to do in person. I'm finding that I'm doing this more on social media because it gives me space to think about how I want to respond. And it's helping me develop these muscles in a safer space, especially when it's on a private message, like where people can't see it. The challenge of that is that you don't get verbals, you don't get body language, you can't hear tone of voice. So you have to be really, really curious and open and not assume too much from someone's words. Like if someone says something that really like just hits you, you almost have to be more curious in the moment because we don't know exactly what their intention was. But I've noticed that I'm getting better at the verbal conversations, the in-person conversations, by practicing these things on social media and in email. I know with email, I've seen a lot of cases in organizations, nonprofits, especially on boards or in church organizations, where people start using email as a replacement for actual dialogue. And I have found that this is one of the best pieces of advice that someone ever gave me. They said, if you find yourself rewriting an email over and over to try to get the words just right, you need a phone call. And that has stuck with me because there have been so many times where I have been trying to communicate something that's delicate or that I want to get just right. And I realized, you know what, I just need to call this person and talk through it with them because my words may not come out the way I intend over email. We have to be really careful about that, how we choose to resolve situations. So keep that in mind, that advice that HR person gave me. If you have to keep rewriting that email, it probably needs a phone call. A lot to process here. Whoops. I want to just highlight an organization that I think is doing something really, really cool. It's called Living Room Conversations. And they say healing divides starts with conversation. I just encourage you, if you have some time, to go and just surf this website. It's pretty simple. But what it's encouraging is for people to come together across divides, across age, politics, generations, race, nationality, et cetera, and have conversations around difficult topics. And they provide guides on how to do this. They give you like, here's a starting point, or here's how to facilitate this. It's just a wonderful way or framework to start getting your toes, putting your toes in the water around talking about these things. Because again, I come back to this sense of, if we are not talking about hard topics in our nation, in our organization, within our friend groups, that means we're avoiding something that's happening and we're not finding a solution. We're just working around it. We're walking around it. We're sort of tiptoeing. We don't want to create waves. But what if our relationships become deeper, become stronger because we lean into hard conversations? What if we can have more mutual solutions as a result of those conversations? So give you some things to think about there. So I want to just do a quick poll here, because this is actually the end of our time, is the end of our 4-part series. We have unpacked so many things, so many things. And I also want to give time for comments and questions and in our poll. I can stay on for a few extra minutes. So if people they want to talk through this further, we can do that. But let's start with that poll. And the poll is, after today's webinar, how are you most interested in using these communication tools? How are you where do you see the greatest opportunity for you to engage in conversation? Where do you think you're going to get the most lift? Lots of responses coming in here. You have to think too, like, okay, where do I have, in what context do I have people where I disagree with, like people that there might be tension? Yeah, lots of, so the options are with my work colleagues, on social media, in conversation with my family members, in conversation with friends and other. I'm going to go ahead and share the polling results here so you can see. And most people are feeling like this could be with my work colleagues. Others saying with family members, absolutely. Conversation with friends, and a few of you with social media and other circumstances. And I think this is a muscle. I'm just going to repeat that. It's a muscle that we can grow. And don't worry, you'll have awkward conversations. You'll have things that fall flat. You will inevitably step in landmines. I've been there. And when you do, when you say something that comes out wrong, when you have an impact that you don't intend, repair. Repair is one of the most beautiful and productive things we can do. In fact, we can become better, have better relationships when we make mistakes, and then we repair them, because then we're showing that we're human, that we're humble, that we are willing to grow and learn. So I would say, keep trying these things, test them out, role play when you need to. If you want to go into a really tough conversation where the risk is high, talk to someone that you trust where you can role play it and just practice it together before you go into that high stakes situation. Because sometimes what we say in our head, like the way that we hear it, someone else hears it differently, and we may need to have that feedback. So I want to ask, for those of you who are comfortable with the chat, what are some other things that you would recommend to people? What have you found to be helpful if you were, if someone was coming to you with a difficult conversation like this about opinions, or if you were approaching someone else about their opinions? What has helped you? I'll give that moment for reflection there. Sarah says, knowing when to stop. Absolutely. That's a skill, like being able to recognize when someone's done, like when someone is not ready to move forward, or when someone's exhausted by it. So thank you for sharing that, Sarah. That takes really good self-awareness and empathy. Wendy says to approach with curiosity. Absolutely. And that can be so hard, especially when we really feel we're right, or we have this assumption, we have a story in our head about what someone says. To go with curiosity it's a real shift. And it's a shift based on our American culture. We are not trained, we're not conditioned to go into things with curiosity. Erica says to use a primer, like starting a conversation with, this is coming from a place of love. Yeah, I mean, I think to be able to root your conversation in your intention, what intention you have for the conversation, I think that can be really helpful. And I also want to share, if any of you have any questions or you want to pose something that we can address, even others can share in the chat as responses, please feel free to do so. Hannah, would you like to hop back on? Because I think I'd love to just hear from you, like what's going through your head as a co-host here. You and I have had some really good about this topic in general.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you helped us unpack this today. Thank you so much. Like I shared, and we have a lot of alumni on the call and even class members. And something that we, in talking with alumni and talking as a staff here, is just seeing that it is getting harder and harder to have these deep conversations. And so conversations that used to happen maybe more organically take a lot more energy on the part of the facilitators, and just for each of us, approaching with curiosity, I feel like is becoming a heavier lift every day. So yeah, I really appreciate you unpacking that with us. And I hope that you all did as well. This has been a great 4 weeks. In just a few moments, you are going to receive an email from me with a link to a survey. We would love it if you could give us some feedback. That will help us as we look to future webinars. And of course, it will help Dr. Strother as she's considering and always asking for feedback. So we would love to get your feedback on this webinar series.
Yeah, and I just want to say thank you so much for engaging with me. You know, even to share things in the chat can be in a vulnerable place. And a lot of you have been really honest and candid. So I appreciate you being with me, accompanying me on this journey and engaging. And I do want to say, if you want to reach out, if you want to have further conversations, or you want to say, hey, you know, like something you said really did not land on me well, or I'm really curious about this, I want to know more, feel free to reach out by my email, which is strother@gonzaga.edu. And if you just want to learn more about other additional leadership development opportunities outside of agroforestry leadership, which is a partner to Gonzaga, then you're more than welcome to find that at our website, which is gonzaga.edu/lead4life. So thank you all so much. And I'll